Mist clings to the canopy. Moonlight filters through wet leaves, silvering the branches. Somewhere high above, a shadow detaches from a trunk. It glides silently, limbs outstretched, tail taut. The membrane between its fingers and toes catches the air like a living sail. For a moment, it is not a mammal. It is a shape that belongs to neither tree nor ground, moving through the forest as though the rules of gravity were optional. It lands on another trunk with a soft thud, curling close to the bark. Its mottled fur blends seamlessly with lichen and shadow. Eyes wide and unblinking, it scans the forest. Everything in its world is above it, below it, around it. And yet it remains unseen. This is the Colugo, silent, elusive, and utterly specialized, a master of the airspace between trees. This year seems to be the year for exploring gliding animals. So far, we have already looked at the wrist-winged gliders of Australia and New Guinea, and the flying dragons of India and Southeast Asia. Today, we are examining another, the Colugos, sometimes known as the flying lemurs. They neither fly, nor are they lemurs, so I will simply call them Colugos. Colugos are placed in the order Dermoptera. With only 2 living species, they represent the surviving remnants of an ancient lineage, carrying anatomical traits found nowhere else among living mammals. But their closest relatives puzzled biologists for decades. Because of their extensive gliding membranes, many suggested they were closely related to ancestral bats. If true, this would have been an exciting discovery for research into the development of powered flight in mammals. Genetic analysis overturned that hypothesis entirely. Colugos belong instead to a clade known as the Euarchonta. This is a group of 3 orders of largely arboreal mammals. Within this group, the tree shrews and scandentia branch off first. Once thought to be primitive primates, these small, squirrel-like mammals of Southeast Asia are agile omnivores, with insects making up the largest part of their diet. Then we come to today's subject, the Colugos and Dermoptera. But that leaves the question, what are their closest relatives? The answer, surprisingly, is us. Well, the primates to be exact, including everything from humans to baboons to lemurs. At first glance, this seems unlikely. Colugos glide through rainforest canopies. Primates grasp branches and manipulate objects. Yet beneath the surface, similarities begin to emerge. Both possess large, forward-facing eyes suited to stereoscopic vision, perfect for judging distances when jumping or gliding through the trees. Both show similarities in aspects of their ankle joints and the structure of their eye sockets. Even their brains show some surprising similarities. Colugos haven't developed tool use, as far as we know, but their brains are expanded in certain regions associated with vision and coordination, exactly the areas you'd expect in an arboreal animal. These lineages diverged between 79 and 86 million years ago. By the time the asteroid struck at the end of the Cretaceous, wiping out the non-avian dinosaurs, the ancestors of Colugos and primates had already been evolving separately for over 10 million years. What we are looking at then is not a primitive primate, nor a failed bat, but a sister lineage to our own, evolving independently since the age of the dinosaurs. Today, only 2 living species represent the entire order Dermoptera. The Sunda Colugo, Galeopteris variegatus, is the more widespread of the 2. It ranges across mainland Southeast Asia and the Great Sunda Islands, Borneo, Sumatra, and Java. Across this range, populations are separated by seas and mountain barriers, and those isolations have left their mark. 4 subspecies are currently recognized, each corresponding broadly to Java, Borneo, Sumatra, and the mainland. Interestingly, across its range, body size varies notably, with some populations around 20% smaller than others, a pattern sometimes referred to as a dwarf form. But this size difference does not neatly match the recognized subspecies boundaries. Instead, it appears to reflect local ecological pressures rather than deep evolutionary splits. The taxonomy of Sunda Colugos remains under discussion. Some researchers have proposed elevating parts of this complex to full species status, potentially recognizing distinct Bornean and Javan species, while leaving the Sumatran population as a subspecies. For now, however, they are generally treated as a single, though variable, species. The other living species is the Philippine Colugo, Cynocephalus volans. Restricted to the southern Philippines, particularly Mindanao and surrounding islands, it is geographically isolated by its Sunda relative by deep ocean channels that have persisted even during periods of lower sea level. That long isolation is reflected in its anatomy and genetics, which are distinct enough to place it in its own genus. Compared with the Sunda colugo, the Philippine species tends to have a slightly paler, more contrasting facial pattern and subtle differences in skull morphology, but the overall body plan remains unmistakable. Together, these two species are the last surviving remnants of a lineage that once had a far broader distribution. Fossil Dermopterans are known from parts of Asia and possibly even Europe, suggesting that this was once a more diverse and widespread group. Both living species are medium-sized nocturnal animals, roughly the size of a house cat, with large forward-facing eyes, a long tail, and a remarkable membrane of skin stretching between their limbs. At rest, that membrane, known as the patagium, hangs loosely along the body. When extended, it transforms the animal into something altogether more unusual. Colugos are strictly arboreal. They almost never descend to the ground, preferring to remain high in the canopy. On tree trunks, they cling close to the bark, their mottled fur blending almost perfectly with lichen and shadow. They move deliberately rather than quickly, climbing with an awkward hugging motion that inches them higher up the trunk. It is only when they launch into the air that their true form becomes apparent. These are not experimental offshoots or evolutionary curiosities. They are the sole survivors of an ancient order, specialized, persistent, and remarkably distinct. It is in their anatomy that this distinctiveness becomes most apparent. Colugos may be the closest living relatives of primates, yet they have had tens of millions of years to refine their own lifestyle. They do not move like primates, grasp like primates, or see the world in quite the same way. Take the eyes. Colugos have enormous forward-facing eyes, and their vision is clearly important. But unlike most primates, they lack a complete postorbital bar, the bony ring that encloses and stabilizes the eye socket. In primates, that structure helps support precise visual tracking, particularly during rapid head and body movements. And speaking of movement, that is another way in which their eyes differ. Colugo eyes have very limited mobility within the socket. They cannot glance sharply to the side as many primates can. Instead, they must move their entire head to scan the forest, more like an owl than a monkey. When it comes to body movement, Colugos again reveal their uniqueness. They cling, they glide, they do not leap with explosive force between branches. Their hands and feet tell a similar story. Primates are graspers. Many possess some degree of opposability, the thumb able to press against the fingers in a precision grip. Even where true opposability is reduced, the basic architecture of the hand supports manipulation. Colugos, by contrast, have long, slender digits that act more like hooks than pincers. They can grasp bark effectively, but their hands are not built for fine manipulation. Their thumbs are not truly opposable. Instead of evolving towards dexterity, their limbs have elongated and unified to support an entirely different function, one that becomes obvious only when they leave the tree trunk. And while their hands are poorly suited to manipulating tools, their sharp, curved claws are far better adapted for anchoring to vertical bark than the flattened nails seen on most primates. Then there are the teeth. Perhaps the most striking feature in the Colugo's skull is the lower incisor row, which forms an intricate comb-like structure. Each tooth bears multiple slender projections, creating a grooming tool built directly into the jaw. Tooth combs also appear in certain primates, particularly lemurs and lorises, but the resemblance is misleading. The structure in Colugos differ in fine anatomy and likely evolved independently, an example of convergent evolution. Similar ecological demands can produce similar solutions, even in closely related lineages. Even the proportions of the body diverge. Primates often have relatively mobile shoulder joints, enabling swinging through the branches, leaping, or complex climbing. Colugos, in contrast, show modifications that stabilize rather than liberate the limb, preparing it for tension across a stretched membrane rather than rotational freedom. In short, primates refine the hand, the shoulder, and eventually the brain. Colugos refine something else entirely. That refinement is written across their entire body in a single structure, the patagium. Unlike the more limited gliding membranes of flying squirrels or marsupial gliders, the Colugos patagium is extraordinary in its extent. It stretches from the sides of the neck to the tips of the fingers, continues along the body to the toes, and extends all the way to the end of the tail. Even the spaces between the digits are webbed. When fully extended, it forms one of the most complete gliding surfaces evolved in any mammal. Here it becomes clear why early naturalists believed colugos were closely related to bats. Such extensive membranes are otherwise seen only in true powered flight. Among bats, this membrane can even envelop the tail, particularly in sheath-tailed bats, contributing to their remarkable aerial control. Superficially, the resemblance is striking, but the similarity ends there. In colugos, this membrane hangs loose at rest, almost cloak-like. When a colugo launches from a trunk, the transformation is immediate. The limbs spread, the tail stiffens, and the body becomes a living kite. This is not powered flight. There is no flapping, no thrust, but it is controlled. Colugos can glide for well over 100 meters in a single descent, losing remarkably little height relative to distance traveled. They steer with subtle shifts of the limbs and tail, adjusting tension across the membrane to change direction. The broad surface area provides lift, the elongated limbs provide span, the musculature fine-tunes stability mid-air. The skeleton reflects this commitment. The limbs are lengthened, the joints are configured to support tension rather than rotational freedom. The fingers and toes are elongated to maximize membrane spread. Even the cartilage supports within the membrane contribute to maintaining its shape during the glide. This is not an add-on adaptation. It is an integrated body plan, and it shapes behavior. Rather than climbing down and crossing the forest floors where predators wait, colugos launch from height and travel laterally through the canopy. Gliding is not merely an escape response. It is routine locomotion, a means of feeding, dispersal, and territory navigation. But specialization comes with trade-offs. On the ground, a colugo is awkward and vulnerable. Its limbs, so well adapted for tension and extension, are ill-suited for rapid quadrupedal movement. And without powered flight, it cannot simply lift off from the forest floor. A glide requires elevation. Height is not optional, it is essential. For this reason, colugos rarely descend voluntarily. If one is on the ground, it is exposed, displaced, and in danger. Even climbing is slow and deliberate rather than agile. In evolutionary terms, colugos have committed fully to the airspace between trees. They do not swing beneath branches like gibbons. They do not leap explosively like siphakas. They do not brachiate, sprint, or bound. They launch, they sail, they land, and then they climb again. It is an elegant solution, not to flight, but to forest. For an animal so committed to the space between trees, reproduction presents a particular challenge. A colugo cannot build a nest on the ground. It cannot retreat to a burrow. It does not have a rigid pouch to carry its young like a sugar glider. Whatever strategy it employs must function mid-canopy, suspended between trunks, bark beneath its claws, open air below. The solution is as unusual as the rest of its anatomy. Colugos give birth to a single young after a relatively short gestation, roughly 2 months. The newborn is tiny, underdeveloped, and able to cling securely on its own. In this early stage, it resembles the young of marsupials more than that of most placental mammals. But colugos are not marsupials. They are fully placental mammals. Instead of a true pouch, the mother uses her patagium. After birth, she folds the gliding membrane forward, drawing it around her abdomen to form a temporary cradle. The young attaches to a nipple and remains there, sheltered within this living envelope. The same membrane that will later carry them both across the forest now protects the infant against gravity. For weeks, the mother continues to glide with the young attached. Every launch, every landing, every climb must accommodate an additional passenger pressed against her body. As the infant grows, it begins to cling more independently, riding against the mother's underside or back. Development is slow. Weaning may not occur for 6 months or more, and reproductive rates are low. Typically, they only raise one young at a time. This is life history shaped by stability rather than speed. In the high canopy, survival depends on caution. A fall could be fatal. A misjudged glide carries consequences. Investing heavily in a single offspring, protecting it within the patagium itself, may be the only viable strategy in such an environment. Even here, the gliding membrane is not merely an adaptation for movement. It is woven into every aspect of their biology. Colugos are not merely gliders moving through the forest. They are participants in its structure. Both the Sunda and Philippine colugos are primarily folivorous. Young leaves form a substantial part of their diet, supplemented with flowers, fruits, and sap. Feeding high in the canopy, they process large volumes of plant material each night. Leaf eating in treetops may seem inconspicuous, but it shapes the forest in subtle ways. By selectively feeding on new growth, colugos influence patterns of leaf production and potentially affect competitive dynamics between tree species. When fruit is consumed, seeds may be dispersed away from the parent tree, carried across the canopy by glide rather than by branch-to-branch movement. They are also prey. In the Philippines, the critically endangered Philippine eagle relies heavily on arboreal mammals. In some studied nests, colugos have been recorded as forming over 90% of identified prey remains, making them one of the eagle's most significant food sources. In other parts of Southeast Asia, large forest raptors and arboreal predators likely take them opportunistically. In this way, colugos form a conduit of energy, transferring the productivity of leaves and fruit upward through the food web. They convert plant matter into animal biomass within a vertical layer of forest that is otherwise difficult for many predators to exploit. Their gliding behavior itself may also influence canopy connectivity. By routinely traveling laterally between trees, they function as mobile links within the forest structure, moving nutrients, seeds, and energy across gaps that ground-bound mammals might avoid. They are neither dominant herbivores nor ecological engineers on the scale of elephants. Their impact is quieter, but in dense tropical forests, ecological roles are often subtle rather than dramatic. Remove a canopy folivore, and the consequences ripple outward, to predators above, to plants below, and to the architecture of the forest itself. Colugos occupy the space between trees, and in doing so, they connect them. For now, colugos persist. Both living species are currently classified as least concern. They remain widespread in parts of their range, and in some regions, they can even tolerate secondary forests and selectively logged habitats. But resilience has its limits. Across Southeast Asia, deforestation continues at one of the highest rates in the world. Lowland forests, the very habitats colugos prefer, have been cleared extensively for agriculture, logging, and plantation development. Palm oil, in particular, has transformed vast areas of Malaysia and Indonesia. In the Philippines, forest cover has been dramatically reduced over the past century. For a terrestrial mammal, fragmentation is an obstacle. For a glider, it can be a solid barrier. Colugos do not simply need trees, they need connected canopy. A glide requires height, and it requires a destination within reach. When forests become isolated patches separated by open land, roads, or plantations, the usable airspace between trees disappears. An animal built for lateral movement through continuous canopy cannot easily cross open ground. In such landscapes, populations may become isolated, genetic exchange declines, local extinctions become harder to reverse. At present, colugos endure because enough forest remains, but their entire evolutionary strategy, their membrane, their locomotion, their reproductive behavior, is tied to a three-dimensional environment that is shrinking in many parts of their range. They are not the most endangered mammals in the world. They are, however, among the most specialized, and specialization depends on stability. Colugos are not relics of a failed experiment, nor half-formed primates frozen in time. They are the surviving sister lineage to our own, a branch that chose a different path tens of millions of years ago. While primates refined the hand and, eventually, the mind, colugos refined the membrane and the silent descent through leaves. They live not on the forest floor, nor fully in the sky, but in the narrow airspace between the trunks, converting height into movement, foliage into energy, and distance into glide. For now, they endure, but their entire existence depends on continuity of canopy, of forest, of the living architecture that makes gliding possible. As long as those forests stand, the space between trees will still belong to them. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the Colugos. If you're interested in the research behind this episode, you can find a document with image credits and sources in the description below. These videos take a great deal of time and research to produce. They will always remain free to watch. But if you would like to support the channel and gain access to new videos a little earlier, you can find a link to my Patreon below as well. If this video sparked your curiosity, don't let it stop here. Share it, talk about it, and keep learning. There's still so much to discover about the world's rare and remarkable species. And the more we understand, the better our chances of protecting them. Thanks for watching.